Well, hello and welcome to Code3 Conversations. I am Cece Strong, and I am so glad to welcome you into our conversation this evening. The reason that Code3 Conversations is here is because we are actually working to have better communication overall, not just between law enforcement and the community, but just in our everyday contacts with people. We here for Code3 Conversations live by the riots method. I know that sounds crazy, but stay with me. The R being for respect. We ask that you respect everyone. If you decide to come over and join us on the panel side, please do. Come on over. Let us know that you want to join in the discussion. We would love to have you. We ask that you're respectful, that you remain in integrity, and anything that you share is basically something we can reference back to and we know is truthful. We ask that you be open minded. We all have different opinions. We are not the same, but we have different experiences and things that have brought us to the point of where we are. And we ask for things to be truthful. Now, I know integrity and truthful, totally different things, truthful and transparent, that you openly ask and share because all of us can learn from each other. And that last part is sharing from your heart. If you have something that you want to discuss, please share it with us. I invite you to use your raise your hand feature. And if you don't know where that is, if you look down at the very bottom and kind of hover your mouse, if you're on a laptop or your computer or on your phone, you can kind of tap your screen a little bit and you should be able to find where it says to raise your hand. If you do so, know that you're coming over into the side of the panel and then we can have the discussion. We ask that you actually stay with us throughout the entire time and join in on the topics. I always tell people to make sure you have something to write with. We love your feedback after the Code3 Conversations and, of course, drinks and snacks, because I'm always going to have something to snack on and something to sip on while we are having the conversations. We want it relaxed. We don't want it stiff. We want you to enjoy the time here with us. And we are so happy to have you here with us. And lastly, even if you don't come over onto the panel side and you opt to just watch, please use the chat feature. And my team is tracking it and actually able to alert me if I get way off in left field and don't look down all the time checking the chat. They'll keep me on point to make sure that your questions are answered. So, as I've said, you may recognize a face or a name on the screen similar to my own. When I decided to do these Code3 Conversations many months ago, I would never have known that my husband coming on to one, actually just listening in and was going to just support from the beginning. He was like, I like this. And he's been coming on to every single one of them ever since. So I enjoy because we get to banter back and forth, and we have even those opinions that we banter back and forth, he and we don't always see eye to eye. And it's okay because it's the differences of people, opinions, places, experiences, everything that makes up you as a person that makes the world go round. We didn't order from a menu who we were born into. So it's kind of crazy if we can't get along. We didn't make all those decisions. I mean, because I would have been taller, you know, a little more curvy. I don't know. Anyway, and Eric raises his eyebrows. I love it. But we are going to be discussing our Code3 Conversations with you today, and we will be looking at the chat. So please drop your chats, your comments. I see that a few came in. Hey there. And I won't say a name of anybody who's in the chat unless they want to actually come on the panel side. But I see your hey there. I see a hey there and a shout out to Eric. And so we thank you and we want to keep those conversations going. So we're going to actually switch over and I want to share my screen with you for the actual PowerPoint slides. So the way this runs is we have 4 topics that we pull. A lot of times they come from comments that actually come from comments from social media. And so I posted once about what would you change if you were improving law enforcement? And it people came with such amazing comments. Here's the normal ones that I see. All police officers are bad. We pay your salary, so you need to do what we say. Police officers are all abusive. Oh, And you guys need to train more. Reform. That's another word that's like thrown out there repeatedly, but I don't know if anybody's really looking to define it and sit down and talk. And what does that look like? And how do we get there? Not just from the law enforcement perspective, not just from the community perspective, but from a collective perspective. So that's what we hope to do with Code 3 Conversations, to use your information to say, hey, how can we help to improve? So, with that being said, I'm going to get us started with all of our fabulous slides. My team's amazing and they make me look good with all of this hard work that they do behind the scenes. So, I gotta love it. So, our first conversation topic is crime and consequences. So, a lot of the times you'll hear us talking and we're talking about how law enforcement can improve. I am of the philosophy that we have to look at also the reason that we're brought to situations as far as the improvement with crime. And what we all ultimately want to see is for it to decrease and to continue to do so. Some people see it from a different perspective and say, hey, that's job security, because when people are committing crimes, you have law enforcement officers. But there's also the safety and protection piece of just monitoring and making sure that we all stay safe. So, with crime and consequences, this is CC's opinion. If you commit a crime, it needs to go through a process. I'm not your judge nor your jury on the street. And I think sometimes when we have those misconceptions, like when we say, and I said earlier, we don't order from a menu who we're born into. But if you have certain feelings about certain people, that can get in the way. If you assume automatically that in a domestic violence situation that the man is the abuser, well, you may be wrong. And until you step back for a second and try to see what happened or get as much information as you can to make a determination, it makes it pretty sticky. Crime and consequences. To me, a crime has a consequence, and it's penal codes, and there are laws, there's health and safety. There's so many different things that govern how we arrest, what that process looks like. And on the side of an officer, it is not for us to also decide what this person's punishment or consequence necessarily is in that moment. So that is my thought, and I'm going to lob that ball over to the screen that is next to me over this way and say, Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I agree with you in a lot of ways that, there's, we are not the judge and jury, but I want to add a little bit to that is our, our society has come to a place where they think crime and consequence for the most part is the only way to handle things. We're just now really getting into a real calling demand and um not only calling a demand, but people are really starting to look at it now in terms of resources and services. As we talk about, from the organization, the agency that we come from, in our jails, we have the largest mental health hospital in the country in our jail. And I really think something's wrong with that. And I think, we really have to look at what we've been doing and how we've been doing it and how we've been trying to arrest our way and consequence behavior.
Right.
And I give this scenario, and I think I did it in maybe one of the other conversations, but I give this scenario of you have like an expensive vase in your house and you put it in the living room and you tell your kids, stay out of the living room. Don't
Mm-hmm.
play in the living room. Don't throw the ball in the living room. Don't run in the living room because this vase is expensive and I don't want you to knock it over. I don't want you to break it. Right. And so now your kids go and they do everything you told them not to do. They run, they play, they jump, they throw the ball, and they end up knocking over that vase and breaking it. Should there be a consequence? Yes. They did not do what you told them, or they did what you told them not to do. And, a bad thing came, the vase was broken. So now, should there be a consequence? Absolutely. But let's just say the exact same vase in the exact same room and the exact same kid, and your kid is walking by that case and has a medical emergency. Let's say they just have seizures or they fall and they pass out and they knock over that vase and they break it. should there still be a consequence? I mean, after all, the vase is broken. That was what you didn't want. You didn't want the vase broken. And what we've done, and I think in our society, especially with law enforcement and the courts, is we have stopped looking. Well, we're getting to that point now, but for many, many decades, we didn't look at what caused the vase to be broke. We just said, the vase is broke, so therefore there's got to be a consequence. And it didn't matter if you broke the vase because you were having a mental health episode. It didn't matter if you broke the vase because you were, suffering from substance abuse. It just matters that you broke the vase. And there was only one place that you went, and that was jail.
Yeah.
We're getting to the point now where we have to really start looking at things and say, is it a crime? We have to look at the individual set of circumstances, because if it's your kid, same action took place. The consequence was, I'm sorry, the result was that the vase was broken, right? But one of them, you're worried about, I got to get consequence. The other one, you shouldn't even care about the vase. You shouldn't even really even think that the vase shouldn't even come into play, because now you're caring about your child.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to get with society. We need to care about the people, and care about what caused it, as opposed to just say the vase is broke, there's got to be a consequence. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my take on it.
Good example. And with Twin Towers Correctional Facility being a growing mental health hospital, even from the time between you were assigned there for a minute and then I ended up being assigned for there, we know the span of time that the towers increased in mental illness in each of those floors. And now that whole building, I'm hearing, is almost completely
The
on
whole
both
building
sides.
is, yeah.
So we want consequences for crime, but where do we put them? Like the people that are really out there committing crime, it doesn't allow for enough space when the whole entire building is full of people with mental illness. And this is personal experience. This is not, something I read. It's not something that I'm just pulling out of thin air, literally walking those hallways and working in that environment. And over time, it has just gotten worse. So now the real criminals, if you will, or the real crimes are not being handled completely because the spacing is not there. And they're not being vetted enough to actually send them to get the help that they need for some of the more minor things that happen. And then you find out it was because of some type of mental illness. And I can tell you some stories that would gross you out. I won't get really gross, but there's a difference when you can say someone's kind of playing the system and when you see them doing things that you would never, like, literally makes me have bile in my throat almost as I'm thinking of some of the things I've seen within there. You can know that they really are mentally ill. And the crime, yes, deserves a consequence. Absolutely. And so I totally, totally agree um, uh, with you on that particular thing that we need to be able to get to a better point of really making crime and consequence match, and then also that key piece of how do we connect in with better mental health for people, because that is a very big missing component. And then you're requiring a young deputy who's not a psychology major. They don't, they don't always, you have to mirror match some levels of de-escalation and learning, but they also have to have a way to, how would I say, they shift their thinking in the moment to be able to pause, safety permitting, and try a different tactic and I understand what actually got us there. So I'm in agreement with you about that.
Yeah, I think probably a more reasonable, just as you were talking about crime and consequences, to understand this. Yes, there's evil people in the world. Evil happens, and there needs to be jails to hold people for for public safety. Um, but I go to this. You have the guy that is fully, um, just for whatever reason, decides, you know what, I'm just gonna go, take from anybody and everybody that I can, because I want to put money in my pocket so I can buy new shoes and buy gold chains. And that's just how I want to survive. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go and steal and rob so that I can, floss and flash. And then you have the guy, same action, who steals, but is stealing food. Is stealing because they're hungry or because they're trying to feed their family. It doesn't make the stealing any more right. I'm not saying,
Sure.
but the way that we're set up is all we have is the penal code. Whatever you want to call it, 484, 487, whether it's grand theft, petty theft, whatever it is. But I think, we need to look at the fact that, do we give a guy that's stealing because he's hungry, um, and maybe he's got family that living in a car and trying to feed them? What good are we doing? We put him in jail for 5 or 7 years. The consequence. I mean, what have we really accomplished? When the other guy that's just doing it because he's lazy and he just feels like, hey, this is the easier way to come up. Does he get 5 or 7 years? Maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah. So
Yeah. And I always liken it to I'm not a judge or a jury on the street. Like, I don't get to decide every part of your fate going all the way through that process right there in that moment. But I agree with you. Some of the consequences are, I don't know that they're vetting once they're going and standing before the judge, if they're vetting out like how that person got here, or if then defaults to, we don't have a lot of time to spend to figure those type of things out. There's always what I call movement of the finish line. And but yet we have all these problems growing. Like, at some point you got to start stopping somewhere. And I likened it to working in uniform. And for me, I like to communicate with people. I want to see, like, I don't want to fight with someone. I really honestly don't. I would rather talk to you to figure out what's going to happen, because you going to jail, you're probably going to go anyway. If you've done something wrong, it's probably going to happen. But I don't have to mistreat people along the way in order to actually affect that or have that happen. I remember arresting a guy, a really big guy, and he says, "Well, what happens if I spin around and I, just start fighting with you?" I said, "Well, but in a little bit, some partners of mine are going to roll up, and how are you going to look fighting with a lady?" Like, what is that going to really? And he kind of chuckled, and I had an actual communication with him even while arresting him. And so it can be done. And that's not to say every case. He could have actually spun around, and I had to be ready for that. But I don't think we communicate enough. Before we move on to the next topic, I want to answer the question in the chat. Someone asked me, how tall would you want to be if you could choose? And I said back to that person individually, about 5'7". So I know that's not tall in the big scope of things, but I'm not the tallest person, but I'm pretty scrappy. I can hold my own. Let's just say that. So I love it. And someone else, thank you, with the great analogy when Eric, I believe you were talking about the vase, and the child with having a seizure or something happened to them, a medical episode, and they end up knocking over the vase. The vase is still cracked, but how did we get to the cracked vase was basically what you were giving us. So moving on along, we're going to take a look at escalate versus de-escalate. And boy, do we get plenty in the news, in TikTok. I have to say, I was actually featured on a show called I Crime, and I was one of the subject matter experts, where they would have people capture crimes on their iPhones or their phones, not necessarily just iPhone. But the whole idea was to look at these video snippets and say, what should happen in this case? The good thing is that they did know the outcome of what happened, but they wanted to get the perspective of officers actually for the show. So with that being said, you would see a lot of times that things were escalated where they didn't have to be. And then there were a few occasional snippets where people de escalated situations. Having been a drill instructor, and I was on campus for 5 years training deputy sheriffs with LA County, I knew to actually tell them there was a 0 to 10. And this analogy is what I would give them. You start at level 0. And our actions in force are basically dictated by what is presented to us. So if someone rushes at me, they're aggressive, they're assaultive, they're a high risk to me, there are certain things that I could use. If they are complying with me, then there's certain steps that I take, maintaining my command presence and my verbal communication, all of those things. Well, I would always actually tell them, you start out at level 10. I mean, at level 0, I'm sorry. You have all the way up to work to 10. And if you draw your gun and you say, if you open your mouth one more time, I'm going to shoot you. What happens if the person does nothing at all other than open their mouth like a fish and then close it? If you've already drawn your gun and you've actually made this threat, if you will, veiled threat, if it's really what you intend to do, you've kind of lost some credibility when you don't do that. And I know that sounds like way extreme, but if you already have your gun in your hand, that's probably what you're going to go to. The idea of using all of your communication skills, the ability to talk someone down, the fact that, like, when I'm smaller compared to Eric, per se, I'm trying to actually communicate with him. I'm not going to do it by trying to just grab him and gaffle him up. Well, maybe, but he would soften up and then I'd win anyway because he lets me win. But at least if I was grabbing a guy his size, or I'm going to actually put my hands on him, it would have to first be because he did something. And it's not just me doing it because I'm demanding that he follow what I'm saying, but I have to really play smart. If I'm able to communicate with someone and get them to be influenced by my words, I think that's a superpower. And I know that I was able to use those tactics even while working in uniform. I once had a lady, and this was a major de-escalation. She's standing on the back of a radio cart and she's completely nude, sweaty. It's hot out. She's obviously on something, is what I'm assuming. And she is screaming. All these big guys, I was a sergeant, I had deputies on the actual working the shift with me, and they were like at a loss. Because think about it. If I grab her and I touch her in the wrong place, trying to get her to comply, it's going to look like I'm touching her inappropriately. I don't know whether she's going to fall, what she's going to do. So they call me over, and I'm the sergeant supervisor on the scene. I roll up, I see this woman dancing all over the trunk. She's screaming about ants, and I go, how in the world am I going to get her to get off of that trunk? And so I immediately think to get in the space and have that conversation with her. So I'm like, shh. And everybody's looking at me like I'm crazy, which they probably should have. But in the moment, I'm working with what I know. I studied psychology for a little bit. I didn't finish in it, but it was an initial study in the school after my grammar school and regular school. Anyway, I do the shh, and she gets quiet. And I say, you got to stay really still. Because for me, it's hot. She's sweaty. She's on the trunk of a doggone car. She's going to fall and bust her head on the ground. And I'm thinking safety, 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 safety. So I first had to get her still. Then I had to tell her to sit down. Because if we're quiet and we don't move a whole lot, the ants can't do anything to us. She sat down. And then she ended up, long story short, getting the special bracelets that you put on your wrist so that the ants can't bother you, and getting into the special back seat in order to avoid the ants. As long as we were quiet and we moved very slow, she and I were both safe. The sad part about it is after I did that, I had one of the deputies come to me and feel like that shouldn't have gone that way. She gets a pass. She's been out here wasting our time. Well, why did you call me over? Why didn't you solve that yourself? Was my end communication with this young person, because he couldn't see the value in talking to someone to get them to comply as opposed to just grabbing them. But guess what? They hadn't grabbed her before I got there. And you actually called me over as a supervisor. So what does that say? De-escalating situations, in my opinion, is using the tools to be the paths of least resistance until such time that you have to go a little bit higher. And when you escalate a situation, basically you're escalating it fitting what is being presented to you. Me rushing in and telling you, hey, you better do what I say just because I said it and I'm wearing my uniform, doesn't always turn out so well. It requires a whole lot. Eric, your thoughts on my story or any other things?
My initial thought, yeah, I mean, I won't even say it. I'm not even gonna say it. That would be mean.
You're gonna
Not
say something
mean,
mean
but
about me? What'd you
no,
say?
not
Come
mean.
on, do it.
I was gonna say, crazy recognizes crazy. So, as they've said
Touche.
before, you know what I mean?
Touche.
Um, but and I mean that, I mean that in the most joking way that I could say it, um, because people can recognize when you mean them no harm. I think people can recognize when, you're trying to meet them where they are, and you're at least giving them some grace and some understanding. And we talked about it in the think tank about, the guy, the deputy who says, I'm not going to talk to anybody about spaceships.
Yes.
They were saying there was a spaceship. I'm not going to talk to them about that. I'm just going to beat them. They're going to get in that car, one way or the other. And it's like, really? Well, why? What are you accomplishing when I could just tell them, hey, if you want to get to the spaceship, the portal's in the backseat of this car. And in order to activate the portal, you got to put these special metal bracelets on. And they say, okay, sure. And they get in. And I mean, and I'm not speaking of anything that hasn't actually happened. I'm talking about actual interactions that I've had with people, and much like you meet them where they are, you at least try. And what people don't understand about de-escalation is that this de-escalation is an effort. It's an attempt to de-escalate. It doesn't always guarantee that it's gonna work.
Absolutely.
And with de-escalation, it's not a one time. Maybe you try something else. Maybe you go down a few paths. Uh, uh, but when I hear the term de-escalation, to be quite honest with you, I think people have it wrong.
Mm,
Um, we do need de-escalation, but what I think is very important is non-escalation. And I've seen too many times, too many videos. I've been around too many officers, deputies, whatever, that go in and they are the one kind of escalating the situation. They're coming in hot and you better do this. And, I've even been, in situations where you have certain groups of deputies or officers that are working on de-escalating, and they're getting there and they're gradually getting there, and somebody just shows up and then they take it to level 10. What are you doing? How are you? What's taking so? No, no, just do this and just do that. And it's almost like, dude, really? I mean, why are we going there? So I think, non-escalation has to be part of the training that we're doing. And I was looking up on my phone just so I can get it right, the year. And this is something that I know law enforcement, for the most part, doesn't want to hear, but I don't see how they could really argue with it. And
mm,
that is non-escalation of certain things. And I go back to um, the Rashard Brooks shooting in Atlanta
mm.
is a key one that, and see, and here's what police, oftentimes law enforcement, oftentimes hang their hat on. It was justified. It was within policy. According to the law, I was justified in doing this. And there's a big difference between doing what you have to do and doing what you can do. You see what I mean?
Explain
Just
that
be,
to me. Flesh that
so
out.
So, because I can use deadly
Oh,
force
doesn't mean I
doesn't
should.
necessarily mean that I absolutely had to use deadly force. It doesn't mean that that was my only option. That was
Got
a
it.
Now, there are times when deadly force comes into play that there is no other thing. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that. But I want to just use this Rashard Brooks thing and just to refresh people and just to kind of talk about it a little bit. Rashard Brooks was a guy that fell asleep in his car in a fast food parking lot. He was
Mm,
contacted by law enforcement. The car was parked. You know what I mean? For the most part, law enforcement got the keys. They got his ID. He asked if he can go to his sister's house. He lived who lived a couple of blocks away. The short story long was that he was intoxicated. He had been driving his car. He pulled into the parking lot, parked, and he fell asleep. You know, now there's some other factors like he may have been blocking the drive-through or his car may have been, but let's just really look at that. That's what they had. And so they went to go and try and arrest him. And when they went to go try and arrest him, you know, um, he pushed away. He took off running. A fight ensued. They tried to tase him, and then when they tried to tase him, he took the taser and took off running. And at some point, he turned around, and whether he fired the taser or not, they shot and killed him. So let's really kind of look at that, like if there was a non-escalation clause. Because here's what I look like as a peace officer. Number one is, what's the threat to society? The threat to society at that point is a drunken driver, a person that's impaired in a vehicle that could cause serious damage, kill people if they drive that 2,000-pound bullet down the road. Well, number one, we had taken that out. The car was parked. We had the keys. So there is no more a threat. Now, what's the two? The second thing is, what happens if we let this guy go? What happens if officers just push away during the initial struggle and he walks away? Well, okay, he walks away, but guess what? He's intoxicated. How far is he going to go? And where's he going to get to? And the reality of it is we have him identified, we have his car, we have his driver's license. What a lot of people don't realize is that we can go write a report, name this person, and then as we talk about sometimes, CC, which is not necessarily a good thing, we can even charge him with failure to comply or obstructing. We present that to the district attorney's office, and now he's got a charge against him. Because the reality of it is, if you get a person that's intoxicated and drunk driving, we're going to take them to jail. They're going to spend about 3-4 hours in a detox cell. We're going to give them a temporary license as we take their hard license, and we're going to let them out anyway.
Yeah.
So when we really start looking at it in terms of a person lost their life, not only that, a law enforcement or a couple of law enforcement officers took a life.
Yeah.
We sometimes forget what happens to them on the other side because they go through a lot of scrutiny. They go through investigations. They went through civil lawsuits, and it was for a good while, I think they were being charged or considering to be charged with a criminal, homicide. And I'm not saying that any of those things are right, wrong. I'm just saying that there's a component of it that could this incident had been avoided if there was a non-escalation, de-escalation mindset within law enforcement, as opposed to the absolute mindset of you did something bad, going back to the consequence. We cannot let you walk away from here. It will just be devastating for the world of law enforcement if we let you walk away, even though we have your car, we have your keys, you can't drive, and you're intoxicated and you're walking down the street. And most of the times law enforcement doesn't want to hear that. And that's just
Yeah.
keeping it real. They don't want to hear that the a lot of things could have been avoided with a different mindset, a different theory, a different philosophy in how we handle these kind of things. And it really goes back to those infractions, really
Mm.
low level crimes. I'm not saying, the guy that just shot 5 people and is running down the street with a rifle or a handgun. Oh, okay. We want to de-escalate.
No.
We're going to non-escalate. We're not going to engage with you. No, I'm not saying that the child predator or the rapist or the carjacker. I'm not saying that, but there are very low level incidents, infractions, traffic violations that turn into deadly encounters that I really think many of them could have been avoided and could have saved a lot of families, a lot of people, a lot of peace officers, just all around. And I really think non-escalation has got to be part of our curriculums moving forward.
Yeah. And
Policies, not only our curriculums, but our policies.
yep. One of the videos from the iCrime show presented me with was a guy stealing something out of like a Walmart or someplace, and he gets to his car, and as the story goes, supposedly would returned everything. He did rightfully steal it, the items, but he gets in his car, and the security guard ends up in this tussle with him in his doorway, the jam of his car, and he starts shooting into the car because the guy starts rolling backwards. And it was all because of this theft out of the store. And it escalated so quickly where you have the guy, you basically have the car, at least the plate or whatever information you have on him. But just what you were speaking about with, is there time in that moment where you can actually shift and de-escalate? It doesn't happen in all situations, of course. Excuse me. Um, it does not happen in all situations, of course, but when the time presents itself and you can de-escalate, that is the better option. Nobody wants someone to lose their lives when there could have been something different. Someone in the chat said de-escalation involves listening and empathy, a calm presence, using affirmative language and offering choices. And then they were asking the question, is that right? I would be inclined to agree with you because listening is the first part of that. Most conversations, which we were talking about in our earlier think tank, with communication, people listen, and I call it double dutch. When I used to play jump rope as a kid, they listen with this balance that we would do as we're ready to jump in to the double dutch. We're not listening to hear, we're listening to get our next point across. So sometimes we miss what the person is actually saying to us. So our communication is not always the greatest. You add to that now the layer of people being, let's say, mentally ill, or the person is, we had a fight. I had a fight with my husband, and I don't really want you here in my house talking to me and trying to solve my personal problems, but I got a big black eye and my lip is busted and he beat me up. And I don't want this to happen, but the dish is being thrown against the wall. My neighbor called and now you're here. And where do we go from there is basically the next step. And if you're not hearing people, you'll make assumptions because you may assume that the guy was the aggressor and you may find out that he wasn't. You may assume any number of things that could be, but until you actually listen to learn, and as this person says, involves listening and empathy with a calm presence. That calm presence doesn't mean that you're a punk or a wimp or that you don't do your job, because sometimes you do have to rush in and you don't have the time for that immediate de-escalation. This is outside of the emergent and the urgent things that we respond to, is what we're speaking about. With that being said, unless you had some other points, Eric, I'm going to move us to the next topic. Don't rush the process. Give space. Validate feelings and experiences. Don't take it personally. And remember the end goal. And for me, the end goal was safety for everybody involved, if that is able to be done so. And I wanted to return home safe. And honestly, if there was a way to make sure the other person made it safe as well, that should be at the forefront of their mind. That's my opinion, not everyone's, but I believe that that should be the most important, is safety for everyone. I'm not your judge and jury, so I don't get to decide what your next steps are after that arrest. So moving to our next, implicit biases. So we all have our ideas, our thoughts, what we grew up with, how we feel about certain people, how we feel about certain opinions, how we feel about cultures, how we feel about just what people's favorite color and food or their choices are. You could be sitting at a football game and you're on opposing teams, and I'm with the Lakers and you're with the Rams. And yeah, I know those are two different sports, but I always joke around like that. I'm not a sports buff. I wear basketball clothing to the Super Bowl parties just to have a conversation piece. But we differ in our opinions, in the way we look and the way we talk, in what we grew up with. And a lot of times we bring into that uniform some things that are good, and sometimes we bring into the uniform things that are bad. You add to that to what we see in social media and narratives that are pushed all around to stir up emotion, to drive people to agree or disagree, to divide, to bring together. Whatever the reason is behind the way people do the things that they do, we all have our biases. I like and taught for a little bit with the Museum of Tolerance. So I was on their actual faculty assist, where I was able to do some training through the Museum of Tolerance. But I love the tour where everyone walks to the two doors and they say, which door, those of you who are prejudiced go through this door, those of you who are not go through this other door. And everybody goes to the non-prejudice or not prejudiced door, and it's locked. And the whole point is to actually get people to understand this is the only other door we're going to all walk through, because we all have our prejudices. We all have our biases. We all have our mindsets about how people are. And usually when someone says, oh, no, I don't have anything negative about people, those are usually the people that probably need to do some soul searching, because you're quick to say that you don't have them. probably means you do in some way, form, or fashion. So, implicit biases in uniform, my first thought in anything dealing with this, and this was one of the comments that someone actually said, this is where some of the root causes are it within the uniform. I believe it is a strong force in some of the problems that we are having in uniform. And me being from the perspective of a Black woman and being in uniform and being even from a neighborhood where people just think everyone is bad, which is crazy to me because so many good things came out of, namely me, out of certain areas. It causes people to actually do their jobs differently. And I hope upon hope that I would never be in a medical office and have someone thinking about me and saying she doesn't deserve the help and she's bleeding out on the table. Heaven forbid that. Or a judgment in court or anything, saving my life from a firefighter's perspective. I would hope that they wouldn't look and then assume and not want to help me in a situation based on what I look like or what my home looks like or what I had for breakfast. I don't know. Eric, your thoughts?
I've been to that training with the Museum of Tolerance, and of course, we all have it. I really believe that any type of bias or stereotype or anything, it's based on one thing. There's one word that describes a negative impression of any particular person, place, thing, race, religion, culture, and that's ignorance. It's ignorance because people typically don't know and they haven't taken the time to get truly informed. These implicit biases come from you typically a one-dimensional, one-sided idea of a person, a location. You mentioned the neighborhood that you grew up in. You know, um, thinking all people from a particular neighborhood are bad. Well, why would you think that? It can only be based on ignorance because ignorance is the presence of a lack of knowledge. You know what I mean? It's funny. It's the presence of a lack. Ignorance is not knowing. And so, unless you've driven through a community and saw the beautiful homes, the manicured lawns, dealt with and talked to some of the most wonderful people, kind, considerate people, why would you think that everybody from any one place is bad? Wherever that may be, there's good people everywhere. I think it comes from ignorance, and I think it comes from um, not also wanting to have a different mindset. In other words, ignorance is one thing, you may not know. But if you intentionally and purposely refuse to learn,
Mm.
that's the thing. And you were there when I would teach, um, to executives how to deal with diverse communities. And one of the things I would do is raise your hand if you are a war buff, a history buff, a space buff. If you like anything dealing with the war and American history, and all kind of people, and Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan, and all of these great movies. But then you start asking them about, did you see Glory? Can you tell me who the Red Tails are? Can you tell me, who Carl Bashir is? And these are all movies and stuff that you could learn about that are about war, but you never went to go see the movie about the most infamous fighter squadron in World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen.
Mm.
So maybe you don't really want to learn all you can about war. You just want to see the parts that, support a certain narrative or things like that. So, yeah, implicit bias is something that um, is built in to people. It's something that is, it's typically not at the. They say it's not at the conscious level. It's kind of like that subconscious thing. But I also think that it's one of those things where if you know that implicit bias exists, then you can work to remove it. There are tests out there where you can find out what your implicit biases are, and you can work to improve it. And the last thing I'll say is this: the only way you're going to be able to treat people fairly and equally and justly is to understand what your implicit biases are, and you're entitled to have them.
Hmm.
You're entitled to have them. What you're not supposed to do is bring them into your decision making and your reactions while you're working, and you have the authority and the responsibility that you get when you wear a badge and carry a gun and can remove people from their homes and can take away their freedom. That's a whole nother topic there.
Yeah, and I like what you said that you have them, because that's first acknowledging it and not the immediate defense that it doesn't exist. Comedians joke about different races of people and different cultures, and everybody laughs like it's a big joke, and people know that it's a joke and they laugh and it's not a problem. But when you bring those type of mindsets immediately into whether or not this person was speeding, committed a crime, deserved to go to jail or not, spirit of the law, letter of the law, when you make it the foundation of what you're dealing with in the moment, and immediately anybody that looks a certain way doesn't know how to drive, or this person is from this area so they have to be a horrible person. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people were shocked that I work with. I even had somebody say, "Oh, well, wow, I didn't know you grew up in Compton." Like, really? And they're just shocked that I grew up in that neighborhood, but it doesn't turn to, wow, I could take a look at that and maybe see that it's not just her that ended up going into law enforcement. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, all type of people. I usually would get this, wow, but you're one of the good ones. I've literally had people
Yeah,
tell me that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
of
like, one
course.
of the good
And
what's is what I
and
want to know.
and
And
let me
it
just say that as you're bringing up these various professions, lawyers and doctors, um, does implicit bias really affect a person if they're working for Sparklets, if they're working for Amazon, FedEx, UPS, if they're working in the corporate world of Visa and American Express? Sure, it can, but who can't act on explicit bias, who just can't, are peace officers, are
public safety
judges,
overall.
are judges, are
Mm-hmm.
doctors
Mm-hmm.
who would think that you're less deserving. I mean, even if you're a pilot for, a major airlines, does implicit bias really impact people? No, because the whole goal is we're going to get the whole plane there together at one time. You know what I mean? I can't, fly you to a different place because I have an implicit bias. Don't think you should be going where you're going, but I'm going to fly, the other 100 people to a different place. It doesn't work like that. But when you have authority and control over someone's freedom, someone's life, someone's health, that's where those implicit biases, how you treat them and the amount of treatment that they get. And I'm speaking of doctors, nurses, etc. Um, you know, those type of professions are the ones that we really, really have to guard against, you know, um, the influence that implicit bias has on their performance or how they react to people.
Yeah. And I was the first thing that jumped in my mind, and I've said it before, is that the penal code isn't color coded.
Actually, it
Except for
kind
the
of
ink,
is.
except for the, except
Some of the laws they create are designed to impact certain people.
they do. But what I'm saying is, if you were reading it as a speeding ticket, it doesn't change for the area that you're driving through. So now it's
Correct.
an automatic. It's like it's a different code used in this area compared to the others. I get what you're saying, but I don't think that we should be acting from a space of an immediate judgment of just about anything that we're rolling up on, because you don't know until you know. Now, that has nothing to do with being safe and being aware. Absolutely zero, because you should be safe and aware everywhere you go. I mean, some of the most heinous criminals you would never have they used to say Ted Bundy was a very attractive man. And he would, woo women into his car saying he had a broken arm, or, can you help me find my dog? And that didn't mean that he wasn't safe. And what does safety really look like? safety looked like whoever's going to save me in that movie when the building is falling apart. And all of a sudden, the hand that grasped out is not the one that you expected. So you never can really know. And go ahead. Did you cut me off, sir?
No,
In the
no, I
middle of
didn't mean
my,
to. I was just you
I was
just
joking.
triggered a thought in my mind.
Go.
Keep
I
going.
love
Keep
those
going. I'm
thoughts.
sorry.
No, no, no. I love those thoughts. Trigger that thought. Go with it.
You were talking about, safety and Ted Bundy, and it brought that same training. And again, you were there, and I would put a PowerPoint together, and I would ask, like, who are the crooks, who are the criminals in these PowerPoints? And nobody ever picked, and I'm just using the training that I gave, not to say that we're changing anything. Nobody ever feared the normal or average looking white male.
Mm,
But when you look at statistically, and we hear it all the time, the majority of our mass shooters, the majority of our serial killers, the
mm,
majority of, you know what I mean, are the white males, but everybody's afraid of a black man.
yeah.
And that is an implicit bias.
Yeah. And it
That is an
starts
implicit
small.
bias, and it starts because the media perpetuates this, people perpetuate this, and I always say this. Oftentimes, we talked about the penal code and decisions and how many drugs and guns do we find because we search these cars in certain neighborhoods, but we never search the cars in other neighborhoods, and we say, oh, there's no
How do you
guns and there's
know?
no drugs there. Well, how do you know if you never got the people out of the car and searched it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And
they're probably driving around with the most because they're not worried about ever getting stopped and searched.
absolutely. And it reminds me of going to see the movie recently. Well, not recently, it's been a while now, but The Little Mermaid, when the I can't even think of the actress who did the more recent version of Little Mermaid, and just the murmurs and the things that people were saying that it was not good to have this movie now with featuring a young black woman being the Little Mermaid.
You
And I
can't be
can
a mermaid.
remember, yes. And so I remember doing a little video clip outside and paying homage to my mom and saying, I wish my mother had lived to see something like this, because the imagery of dolls, like they have done studies where they've held up two different dolls for kids, and they immediately see the bad doll as the doll that would look like me, for the most part. And then the other doll that looks like Eric, then they like that. I mean, well, you're shade, your
Not
shade.
so much
But
that I
they've done
appreciate what you just said.
studies.
That's
Yeah, I know. They've done studies with this type of thing that is already ingrained in the person. So imagine me, a little girl, and I don't see any dolls that look like me. I mean, I'm in my mid 50s, and oh, I'm not going to tell my age. I'm not young. And I'm glad and blessed that God has given me these years. But I didn't see that growing up. So now to see that, now it's like, oh my God, you just ruined everything. It didn't take away the first Little Mermaid movie, people. It just gave a different perspective. And it actually was uplifting for me to say, hey, the little girls that look like me will see something and like, wow, they can take some pride. It's not taking away from someone else. With that, I also want to make sure I'm hitting these. I'm seeing the chat going off. So I want to make sure I hit all of the points of the chat. It's so common, it's considered unconscious, unintentional behavior many times. I'm assuming that the person means implicit bias, that yes, it happens so often that a lot of times it gets missed because, oh, well, maybe they didn't mean it that way. Um, Unintentional. I didn't mean to have you feel that way. And a lot of people will lean on, you can't make someone feel a certain way. You have to own how you feel, but you can speak to someone in a manner that actually tears at them. And one of the things that people always say is, I don't care what people think. Yeah, I doubt that, because I put on a little bit of lipstick and I don't normally wear lipstick. I put on, I got up and I showered and I put on the clothes that I was going to wear. And I may not always say that I care about what people think, but we care about our appearance. That's just one example. So you do actually care what people think, or you would just everybody be running around rogue, which is sad, but could actually happen. Someone said that you were absolutely right. Absolutely right. I did not catch that in a moment of what point you made. Deputies need more training regarding this. Yes. And I hear people say about deputies needing more training all the time. And I totally, totally agree. But I would also challenge the type of training that they're getting. And currently, I don't know of a training other than the one that I have going, working with people individually, that trains before the gun belt and the equipment. And not just the gun belt and equipment, but leadership before it even gets to the point of your equipment. Hey, leadership as a doctor, leadership as a lawyer. It's not just a, hey, all officers have to deal with things like this, but just in professions and how we communicate with people before we go to whatever those things are. And in this case, on our gun belt. You guys are right on point. Thank you for that shout out. Appreciate that. Our goal is to have discussions with more and more robust conversations with people. Love the comments. We do. Statistically, those are the ones. I'm assuming that probably when I saw this comment, it was in reference to the shootings and all of the things. And my heart bleeds with the idea of school shootings. Those tear at my heart because little babies, their reactions are not going to be like adults, and adults are already vulnerable in those situations, but babies, like I have a heart piece for old people and babies. Those are just you just will never get me outside of that. And then someone said very implicit bias. Bringing it into the uniform is where the problem starts. If you have your ideas, your whatever you think, you're entitled to it. We're adults, we're grown. People lean on, I can say whatever I want to say, but I have patches on both shoulders that belong to whatever agency that I'm working for, and I'm representing that agency. So when I take the whole thing of just I can say and do whatever I want to, there's certain guidelines and things that are not the greatest. And I always say, if I'm wearing a body worn camera, you're not going to catch me in something that you're going to use to take my job. If I'm doing my job the right way, I'm not really caring and worried about, oh, shoot, what I just said, because I am doing my job the right way. And then let the chips fall where they may in that situation. What do you say, Eric? We move forward.
I
We
think
hit
we
our
got
next
that.
point. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get to our next point, and it is better background investigations. So I love this graphic, by the way. So shout out to my team. I like the whole background and the case number, the whole CSI, whatever, 48 hours, another 48. And then there's also another slide that goes with this that gets a little deeper into, and I know this is hard to see, but those of you who can go back and watch, actually, you can look at the recordings. Let me take this time to tell you that the past episodes are uploaded to YouTube, so you can follow me on my channel, CC Strong, and you can see all of the history of how I got to this point in the first place. But comprehensive information verification. So basically, verifying identity, employment history, and education ensures information accuracy and reliability before making critical decisions. Criminal records and references is checking criminal records and references helps identify red flags and ensures a safe and trustworthy environment. And then leveraging advanced technology is utilizing advanced technology and thorough processes enables organizations to make informed decisions, improve security, and reduce risk. So I may be tiny on your screen, but I wanted to read that so that you would have it. And I'm going to take this moment to ask Eric because he does an amazing analogy in this. And I love this the first time I heard it. And each time I hear it, I love it even more because it gives a very realistic view. And so I'm going to ask you to share I think you call it applicant A and applicant B. Do you know what I'm talking about when you talk about the two different types of an applicant and how they go through the background process and what's reviewed and what should be considered? So if you would humor me and give us that.
Yeah. So, all of these things that we talk about, what makes a good law enforcement officer. And I think it's important to know that when you are going into people's homes, as a peace officer. Oftentimes, you're going in there to deal with some type of adverse situation. It's again, like I said earlier, you're not going there to, watch people blow out the candles on the birthday cake. Oftentimes, you're going in there and you're dealing with people with adversity. And I remember as a 23-year-old young police officer going into homes and trying to resolve domestic violence or domestic disputes with people who had been married for 20 years. You know what I mean? And I have 10 or 15 minutes to try to mediate, negotiate, you know, do some type of conflict resolution oftentimes. And I've never even been married. I don't even have kids. You know what I mean? So um just wanted you to keep in mind when you're looking at this. So here's applicant A. Applicant A grew up in a suburb, in a middle class, upper middle class neighborhood, two parents that are working, um, does everything that he's supposed to do. He goes to school, stays out of trouble. When he gets about 17, 18, his parents put his name on a credit card so he could start building credit or, so he can use it in case of an emergency if he's out and they can monitor it. Gets out of high school, goes to a 4-year college, be it a Cal State, a university, whatever it is, but his parents can put him through 4 years of college. Um, somewhere in college, a second year, third year, whatever, he wants to buy a car. So his parents co-sign for him. And, he's working. He's not doing, he's obviously not launched his career yet, but he's doing little odd jobs. And, the reality of it is if, he has a job he doesn't like, or he wants to get another job. And, while he's in between these jobs, he needs help with paying his car note. His parents are there to bail him out because guess what? They co-signed. Um, he finishes school. He applies to be a peace officer, and look, he's a great candidate. He's got great credit score. He's finished college. He's done everything he's supposed to do. He's never been in trouble, and he hasn't been in an environment where a lot of trouble has occurred. And so that's the person that we want. And let's take applicant B, who grew up in, South Los Angeles, maybe went to Washington High, where, the school environment wasn't the greatest. Was comes from a single parent family with, a lower level of income. And that applicant goes to school again, stays out of trouble. And, obviously, when they get out of school, their parents didn't have credit cards to put their name on it. So they had to establish their own credit. Parents couldn't afford to put them through 4-year college. So now they're going to a junior college somewhere and they're taking classes as they can afford and as they have time. And the single parent that they have gets hurt. And this parent doesn't have, thousands of hours of sick time and workers' comp. This parent, if they don't go to work, if they don't go do their job, they're not getting paid, period. And maybe they have a very low disability payment or something like that. And so what does this applicant do? Now they need to start helping out their parent, and how do they do that? They've already been helping, but now they go get a second job and you get a second job and you're working extra hours. And so maybe you're at a junior college, maybe it interferes with your classes. You don't plan, you don't time when your parent gets hurt. So maybe you miss the drop deadline or the withdrawal deadline for classes. And, you couldn't withdraw from some. So now you're trying to manage them and your studies go down, your grades go down. And now your little sister's coming up and it's time for her to go to the prom. And what do you want to do? You want to help her. You want her to go to the prom. You want her to have a nice, beautiful dress. You want her to have a good experience. So you make sacrifices, and maybe that sacrifice is now your car payment's late. So now you have dings on your credit. And they go and they apply for the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department looks at them and they says, well, let me take sheriff's department out. Let's say law enforcement. Law enforcement looks at them and says, well, there's no completion. You didn't finish school. Your credit is bad and you're not responsible. So you're not a good candidate for us. Go clean your life up for a few years and maybe come back and apply. Well, if you ask me, who's a better person? Who's demonstrated more responsibility? Who's had to prioritize? Who's had to deal with adversity, which is what we're going to be asking people to go deal with in the law enforcement profession. You got a candidate A who looks great on paper and everything's been handed to them. Not saying they're a bad person, but you have candidate B where let's just say even high school was a challenge because there were probably more people ditching school and not doing great in school than were those that were doing a good thing. And, you kind of stood out there, and you're going to school, you're doing all the things. This is where law enforcement, I believe, fails. But I will also say this is where I believe it's also intentional. Who are we really excluding from the profession when we look at candidate B? Who are we really excluding? You know what I mean? There's a certain different demographic in there that's being excluded. And there's a certain demographic in candidate A where a lot of them may meet those certain levels of criteria. And I believe it's intentional. I know it's intentional. I won't say I believe it is. I know it's intentional. So I don't know if it's so much the comprehensive information verification. It is, what are we looking for? What is it that we feel is a good candidate? And I've heard people say, oh, in order to hire them, you want us to lower the standards. No, I don't. No, I don't. I want the standard to be objectively analyzed across the board. How does a person's credit score at 21, 22, 23 years old determine whether they're going to be a good police officer? I don't think it does. When you look at a person's transcripts, you have to look at the totality of the situation. If the person has never had to do anything, but just go to school and just show up because their parents got it all covered, what type of person, what kind of responsibility, how are they showing you that they're responsible because they have decent credit that their parents built for them and they got a chance to go to school with no interruptions, no adversity, no nothing. They have nothing else to do but just go to school.
Yeah.
So I
I
think,
can't tell you how many parents tried to come with their kids, and not their kids, but their adult now recruits coming through the academy. And we would kind of dress down and go into the uniform store. And you would have parents that were there helping them to pick out all their stuff, and they just
yeah,
hadn't. I mean,
yeah,
it speaks to what you're actually speaking about. And I know that for firsthand, the last assignment I was working before retirement, I ask because there are also little intentional things like you speak about. We were hiring and looking to hire, and the person that was working personnel at the time kept sending me that people were rejecting or they were refusing to take the positions. So one day I get this report and I'm flipping through it and I go, you know what? I'm going to walk over to the desk of the person who handles personnel. And I said, I need you to call two people. And she's looking at me kind of crazy. I said, I want this person. And I'm literally randomly selecting. How this happened, I have no clue, but it was ordained to happen. But I pointed at one person on one page, flipped a couple pages, and pointed at someone else. Now, I had no rhyme or reason for this, but it was said that these were people who were disqualified or they had no refused. So they had removed them from the process for the most part. Well, she goes, okay, I'll call them and I'll let you know. I said, no, I want you to call them like while I'm here. And I actually had her call those two candidates. And I asked them, hey, what about the job is not what you wanted? Or what did you expect? What could have been done? Almost like a survey, like we were taking one. I found out that those two candidates, randomly selected, had never refused the position. They never heard back. There was no
right,
outreach back to them. And so,
right,
in essence, the decision was already made. And there was the idea. I remember one of the people working in the office was honestly was deaf and mute. And I had a sergeant who kept harping on the fact that, if a person doesn't speak a certain language or they have a heavy accent, I don't understand them. What if I was to pass out and I needed help? How are they going to get me any help? And I end up, and I was brand new unit commander just assigned to this location. I ended up going down to the kitchen and meeting this person who didn't speak and did not hear. And I'm sitting in a meeting with a large group of people, and I keep seeing a guy write on a piece of paper and slide it to the guy. And I'm thinking they're like in class, like little kids are like, excuse me, I'm the lieutenant. I'm up here talking like I'm something special. Yeah, whatever. But I was like, "Hey, I want in on the joke. Are you guys passing notes?" And everybody's kind of like, "Ugh, like don't say that," because I don't know and don't realize. But it brought it full circle because I was able to go back to this sergeant and say, "You were worried about if you passed out and you couldn't get anyone to get you help because of the accent, because of the language, because of the barrier that you you believe to be a problem." This guy couldn't hear or speak. And he was one of our most, you know, on point people. And no, he wasn't an officer. He was not on the sworn side. But the fact that that's you person can't run down the hall, grab someone, tug their sleeve, and bring them back to get you help. It's possible. And so when we have those ideas of what should be in that background process and what should come out on the other end of that, it gets very, very interesting with the way people decide what is and what should be or what shouldn't be. And the scary part about it is we have a whole lot of opinions without solutions. Yeah, okay, you feel that way, but what would be your alternative since you have it all licked and you know everything? There's no conversation to actually try to find a uh some type of a solution. So bring a solution with your complaint is what I would say.
And I just want to point this out that, for me, whatever happened, I mean, in other words, you talk to a sergeant, but there's a background investigator that, if you ask me, put false information into a background file. If you're saying that this person refused the position and you're calling like, I never refused, I never got, what happened to those background investigators? You know what I mean? So that's a bigger thing because, you know, um, they're going to continue to do it. And I guarantee you they're probably still doing it if they're still working there. And so they're using their own implicit bias. We talked about that, right? To determine who's a good quality candidate, who's not, who I think we should hire, who I don't think we should hire. And I'm controlling their destiny. But not only that, you're harming the department because the department needs people.
I can
So,
tell you what
there's
happened.
a much bigger, there's a much, I mean, there's a lot that goes with that.
Absolutely nothing, because I
Of
went to
course.
the captain for personnel at the time about it, and yes, we've got to have this investigation of it, and it all was song and dance, and absolutely nothing took place because we default to, hey, you know what, we don't want to harm those in uniform. And that's another, we got to, my team, if you're listening, that's a noted topic. We need to actually have that on one of the Code 3 conversations. But I wanted to actually get to some of these comments because we're nearing and rounding up to the last 15 minutes of our time. And I like to respect the time of those who are attending. And let me just stop here and say thank you to those who are on our attendee side and who are listening in. We value all of the feedback and the information that you're putting in the chat, and we love having you here. I've thought about this topic many times. This is from one of the people commenting. Do you think background investigations could be streamlined for the hiring process? Maybe by simplifying the application submissions, automating the way some of the checks, credit, social media, et cetera, are done, et cetera. I think there are many ways to quicken the process, but still be thorough. A lot of investigators use their um, a lot of investigators use their own methods in the hiring process, and a lot of there are many more comments coming in, so it moves it when I'm reading it. So sorry. A lot of hiring results vary, and then this leads to inconsistencies and sometimes biases and liability issues. Absolutely right. And their question, I will go back to it, is streamlining. Do you currently, with and then I will answer as well, think that streamlining the process is something that needs to take place? And then I have a couple more um, uh, comments that I'm going to get to. I know my feeling about streamlining the process. What do you think, Eric?
Yes, I think that a lot of these backgrounds can be done a lot faster. I think that again, that is a personal thing. I mean, I think that we can. It shouldn't take a year to get 6 months to get people through the backgrounds. And it's funny how we can get certain people through backgrounds very quickly, but others just can't seem to get it done. But yeah, I think we need to really just change the way that backgrounds are done. I think we need to change the review process. Um, there's a lot that needs to be changed. There needs to be people that are really looking at this and doing some audits into who's getting disqualified and why. Um,
And so I can tell you that I remember going and I had a recruit come in through the academy. And this recruit was having some serious challenges, but was connected, as we used to say, friends of the sheriff is what they would call them. And anytime someone had a relative or somebody they knew coming through, it was almost known. Like they would let us know, almost hint, hint, wink, wink. This person, can't get it together, but we wanting them to get through the academy. And mine, when this would land in one of my platoons, I had a heartache with it. So I had one particular person I kept suggesting that maybe this person's not going to work out. This is not good. Like these are provable things that they're struggling with. And it kept being that they wanted it to be fixed. Well, finally, I wrote a memo after calling this recruit in, and they were standing at my desk. And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think you are in this process? And this person said, I'm at a 9. And I was floored because I was putting them around about a 3 or 4. They were struggling horribly. I wrote in this memo that ended up actually going all the way up to the sheriff's office. And I specifically said this: if the person feels that they're already at a 9, when we're never going to ever be perfect, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room for me to fix their mindset along with their skill set. There's a limit to what I can do because this person thinks they're already great. How do I get them to that next level? Had she owned her own struggles, I could have worked with her till my ears turned blue. But she wasn't even willing to own and didn't see anything wrong. A lot of that came with who she was connected to as well. You're already knowing I'm going to graduate just because I'm connected to someone. In that, we do have a large wave of whoever is knowing, and then the people that follow and they're connected to or their family members with. And not all of your family are the right selection for the job either. I don't think so. Someone in the chat said this happens in corporate too. May not have as serious of consequences. And I absolutely believe that. Back to the streamlining. My philosophy is before we change and shift and streamline and do anything else, how good is the process we're already using? How about the deadlines and dragging out certain packets? How about holding the current background investigators to do what they're supposed to do before we just start changing everything? Because people are shouting about change and we're not even doing the very basics. You know why? Because we're used to living in a space where we say, the way we've always done it. Why reinvent the wheel? Don't fix it. It's not broken. How many times do we buy another cell phone because the new version came out?
and let
And
me
we
just add
advance with
this.
technology, but we don't advance with the mindset for real improvement and change. Change just unnerves people, and they
Let me
don't
just
reach
add
out
this.
enough to change.
I want to just say something about this because you just said something where it's we don't need to fix it because it's not broken. And this was a sergeant that you know well that we really respected, who told us that a lot of times it's so time and labor intensive to fix things that are broken. Most people don't want to bother with it. Most of the leadership and the executives, it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of time and effort that goes into it, so they almost choose not to tackle that. And then there also is the part about this: oh, they won't like me if I hold them accountable. They won't like me. I really want people to like me. And if they like me, they'll do a good job for me. And so I turn a blind eye to a lot of things. I let them get away with a lot of things. You and I were just at a meeting with a bunch of deputies, and you were talking
Oh,
about the grooming standards. You know what I mean? Like how is it that we have a grooming standard, but deputies aren't held to it? You know what I mean? And what does that really come to? Well, everybody there has got to see it. and I know I'm getting off topic with the background, but my point is we can't even hold them to a standard when it just comes to a very specific grooming, policy. How are we going to hold them to standards for the important stuff?
Yeah.
And so that's, yeah, that's huge. We got to do a lot better than that.
Yeah, we have, and to me, I think the processes that are in place, because people throw out terms like policy. We need new policies. And again, we got a ton of dusty policies sitting on shelves that nobody's even reading through. People don't even look up what the policy means. They don't even know how to research so that they know what tools they have uh in their uh in their trick bag. They don't even know how to go and find the information, which is the unbelievable. I cannot tell you how much strength and empowering it is for me to be able to go and look up what I need to look up. Because there's no way
And
I'm
you
going
don't
to
have to
read
ask
the
anybody.
whole policy. Yeah, I don't have to go and ask. And at the the deputy level, I was like that. I'm wanting to know. Just because someone's telling me and a sergeant saying, "Oh, this is how we do it," I still would read. And this wasn't being insubordinate. It wasn't being, I had some good experiences where I went to my supervisors and said, "Well, shoot, I was reading this and I don't want either one of us to get in trouble." So I don't know if you knew. And they are
Eh,
big enough and humble enough to say that they understand. It's like, "Oh, well, I really didn't know that. I accept it." And then there are those that, "I was the sergeant. I told you to do something, just go do it. And you're
Because
putting
I'm a
my
sergeant.
job at risk." Yeah, and you're
Right.
putting my job at risk.
And not only policies, but a lot of people talk about training. They need more training.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest with you, we have a ton of training. There's lots of training out there, but the reality of it is the training is only as good as the way it's being presented. And if we're only giving the training because somebody requires it, some settlement agreement requires it, some lawsuit requires it, and the person giving the training, it's a valid training, but the person gives you the training, starts off with, okay, I'm reading this here. Yeah, it says, yeah, well, we got to do this now because a bunch of people complained. And so now we got to do this training. Hey,
Yes.
okay, yeah,
Happens
keep
all
this
the
in
time.
mind. A, B, C, and D. You know what? It's we got to do it. Don't even worry about it. Hey, I'm gonna give you the test answers real quick because you got to take a test. You got to pass, and
And
we
you're going
want
to
to
get
we
out
want
early.
we want to get out of here. Hey, I know this training goes till 4, but there's going to be a lot of traffic, so we need to get out of here by 2:30. You guys want to beat traffic, right? So you guys willing to work
Ouch.
through lunch? We'll go get something to eat, bring it back here. We'll go through lunch. We'll say we did everything, get out early. Good. Everybody good? Okay, boom. So if you got the brand new people coming in, looking at the senior personnel, the advanced officer training personnel, and they're looking at it like, well, they're not taking it seriously. They don't believe in it. They're not doing this. How are you going to get the new people to get buy-in?
Yeah. And so
So,
we
yeah.
are coming to the close, and I want to read some of the final comments in the chat. Thank you. And I say thank you back to the person who wrote that. I appreciate the invite and opportunity to have been a part of this conversation tonight. I would ask that you ask some other folks, join in. My hope is that people will continue to send information, which they do. They will email it in, they'll send it in comments on my social media, which I will leave with all of you. And it's hopeful to get the discussions going. I had also, and thank you, the person acknowledged that they heard me shout out their message. And I have some ideas when you become sheriff. So, Eric, that was to you. For those of you on here who don't know, my husband has decided to run once again. Uh, Trauma moment for me, because the last time he ran, I was politically targeted. Hence, honestly, this good platform as a result of becoming an author and so many other positive things that happened, even though that was a derailment to my career. Um, and I am getting a message really quick from my staff too. And thank you. The person said they would spread the word. Um, um, and I have someone with a Q&A, and thank you to my staff for letting me know this. This is my first time at your webinar, and I'm extremely interested in having this dialogue within my community. Do you have a chapter organization in the metro Atlanta area? If not, is there a group interested in having the community conversation as a community connector? Here is what I would actually tell the person who just sent this. this is, and virtual helps so much to bridge that connection. Code3 Conversations was actually founded by me, and it was as a result of being able to go through some hellacious things in life and come out in a positive way on a good side, keeping my character intact despite of the negativity. The conversations are needed, and I would tell you that if you can grab a pen really quickly, the person who sent this Q&A question to me, and send your request for further discussions to info@ccstrong.com. So that's info@ceestrong.com. And my staff will actually connect you in, and we will get you the help that you need. And we can even talk about discussing some things to get that into your area and people just joining on right here in this forum, because it's not just relegated to LA County and this area.
Yeah.
Um,
And if I could just jump in on that real quick and just say, please know that, I mean, what we're talking about are nationwide problems, and nationwide, we get comments and people from all over the country, and although different uniforms, different badges, that interaction between law enforcement and various communities, it is what happens in Philadelphia happens. I mean, it impacts us as law enforcement in LA and as a community, and vice versa. What happens here impacts those people in New York and Detroit and Chicago. So please keep coming, keep listening, because yeah, this is a nationwide issue that we're talking about.
Absolutely. It's an issue for all, not just in the area for Los Angeles. So again, info@ccstrong.com, and my staff will actually connect you in, and we can discuss how we can actually have people in your area join in. Someone said, um, thank you both for the expertise. Thank you very much for attending. We so appreciate you. We need more that actually think like this and about such topics to this depth. You all are a huge blessing. We thank you and we receive that. And it is from years of 32 years on his part before retirement, 30 on mine, 62 years total, and he's not letting go of it. This guy is going to run again. So if you know people in the Los Angeles area, Eric Strong, you can go to strong4sheriff.com and you can learn about him. Strong, it's the number 4 sheriff.com, and you can learn more about his campaign. He did very well in the last running, came in third out of 9 people and had a huge following in that. And I am very proud to say that, and not just because he's my husband, he is the guy, because he does have that compassion piece and wants better for all, not just some people, and for the overall process. And I want to thank all of you who are thanking us in the chat. We thank you. Let me thank the audience for being here, because this is how we spread the word. I would ask that you invite 2 people back. We'll be back here, same bat time, same bat channel, on October 8th. And it is the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of every month. That's when we do these Code3 conversations. And so I will share with you. I know it's a quick shot, but you could take a capture on your screen, take your phone, take a picture of this. These are the ways to connect in. I would ask that you like, share, follow, have more people join in, contact CC through these means. Info@ccstrong.com is there also if you took a picture of it, or it will be on the recording for those of you who will listen to this later. We welcome everything that you do here, and the conversation continues. It does not stop here. We actually have what's called the think tank, and that's where we go a little bit more in depth, and we're taking ideas because I am believing that this guy right here is going to win. And when he does, I want to be able to implement or ask of him in that whisper, hey, some of the people in our community have some things they want to ask the sheriff. So that will be, and not an avenue, because you can't bribe me. He's not going to give me anything. Trust me. I'm retired and gone. But at least in these forums, if we can impact change to help people overall, that is our intention. We thank you so much for being here for Code3 Conversations. And like the lights and sirens and people rushing down the street to help others, there are more good officers out there on the road than there are the ones that you see in the media. There are plenty of us that actually do lend something good to the profession, and we in turn lend something good to you. So we thank you. Don't forget to join the Think Tank session. And you can find all of this information at ccstrong.com. Don't forget there's two E's behind each C, and it's all one, ccstrong.com. You can learn about my story, how we got here, and you can actually tap into the community and some of the training programs and things that we have to help others. I thank you to the audience. I enjoyed the conversations. Keep it coming. Someone said again, thank you for restoring and reminding me of that last comment about the goods still out there. They are. They are most definitely out there. And no, are you on Blue Sky? I have not been. But shoot some information to my info email and we will actually look into that. Those are the kind of comments that we need so that we grow this community. So thank you. Wonderful conversation. And thank you for those comments. And we'll see you next time. Enjoy your night. This is CC Strong signing off with Code 3 Conversations. And we say blessing to you and yours from me and mine.